Good evening. Welcome to the first ever Winning with Money event at James Madison University. We're so excited to be here in Court Square Theater. I am thrilled to welcome you, those of you that are live here in the audience, as well as those of you who are joining us live via the live stream on the web. We're so excited to have you joining us, and we're thrilled about the lineup we have for tonight's event. Wanted to tell you quickly about how we got to this point. There is a man at JMU who works in the financial aid office named Brad Barnett who is super passionate about financial literacy. Brad pulled together a committee of folks from all across campus, both students, faculty, and staff, to say, what might we be able to do to get the word out a little bit more about this concept of budgeting, credit, debt repayment, and other things money-related. That crew got together and presented at an event called Madison Trust, which essentially, if you think about it like a Shark Tank event, where we went and we pitched the idea for this event. This was sort of our dream, that we would pull together a live audience as well as present the event live via the web to alumni and friends of the university, and essentially reach towards this goal of educating both students and alums about financial literacy. And so here we are today. Folks from the Madison Trust, alumni and friends of the university, invested in this program, in this event. We are so thankful for them, and that's sort of what led us to get here today, was a successful pitch at Madison Trust. The committee that we had involved in this from day one, like I said, was Brad Barnett from Financial Aid, Nancy Nickel, who is a professor in the College of Business here at JMU, myself, Kevin Gibson from the Office of Alumni Relations. We had a few students, Danny Baird from SGA and Senior Class Council, Casey Donnelly from SGA Senior Class Council as well, and Hunter Sjogren from the Student Alumni Association. So we're super excited to have you here with us today. There's another guy who deserves a lot of credit who was on our committee. His name is Chris Myers. He works at JMU in the Office of Communication and Marketing, and he gets all the credit for everything you see behind us. It's his vision coming to reality. So how's tonight going to work? There's going to be a flow, sort of almost like a TED Talk. There will be 4 speakers that speak for about 15 minutes each on the topics that I mentioned before. Brad will get up in between their talks and introduce the next one. The event will be live streamed throughout, so those of you that are online, you will see all of those transitions. We're excited to have you along with us. And then this event will be available live. We're recording it, so it will be available after the fact as well. We'll segment the different topics so that these can be used in classrooms at JMU in the future, and any other use. Again, sort of in the same vein as you might see or view a TED Talk. Our first speaker, who I'm excited to introduce you to, is Michael Rabibo. Michael Rabibo is a 1988 JMU grad. Michael owns 3 of his own businesses, lives in the Northern Virginia area, travels around a lot as well, and is going to talk with us a little bit about budgeting. He's also a certified financial planner, which makes him highly, highly qualified to share with us some of his insights. So please give a warm welcome to Michael Rabibo.
Good evening, everybody. You all hear me okay? Thank you all for braving the sunshine to be out here. I was excited to see a good crowd here, so it's a great opportunity. It's an honor for me to be back at JMU to speak in front of you all today. When you talk about budgeting, most people come up with a lot of stress and a lot of fear, a lot of concerns. And so I wanted to walk through some basic ideas with you. But my son told me today, my son took a class today in financial literacy. He's in 12th grade. And he said, Dad, I just watched a lecture on budgeting, and I hope yours is a lot better than mine, because it's really boring. The kids were banging their heads with notebooks because they were so bored. I said, well, I'll try to talk and make it a lot more exciting. So I'll do the best I can. What I want you to walk away with 4 key ideas that will empower you to really think hard about budgeting and to really use budgeting as a tool to create what you want financially in life. So when you think about budgeting, it's basic stuff. Everybody knows, you take your income, what you think you might make, and you take your expenses and you subtract them from each other, and hopefully you have a positive number at the bottom, or maybe a 0. or maybe a zero. But in many cases, when you put that into real life, what you end up with is, this is getting some feedback. What you end up with is you take your actual life and you take your expenses and you end up with a negative number, which creates stress. And so what happens is you throw the budget out the window and you go and you live your life. That's what I did when I got out of Madison. I didn't worry about budgeting at first. And I read a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People in My 20s. Anybody read that book? I can barely see. Okay, well, it's a fabulous book. One of Stephen's habits that I would encourage you to think about is called Begin with the End in Mind. And the idea is that before you plan any type of activity, you really got to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the future is. And so as a certified financial planner, my clients come to me and they list out their goals. They say, this is what I want to do in 10 years. This is what I want to do in 20 years. And so the process of creating a plan empowers the budget. The budget makes the plan work. And without the budget, you don't get the plan. And it's very hard to think about a budget if you don't have a long-term plan. I personally like a 10-year plan. And the reason is you can really dream big with the 10-year plan. A short-term plan like a year out or 6 months out, it's all realistic. But 10 years out, you can really come up with anything. I did my first plan in my 20s. I had goals to start a company, to take that company public. I had goals to save a certain amount, to get married, to buy a house, to have a family. What I didn't make goals for was to declare bankruptcy because I didn't manage my money right. I didn't create a goal to lose my house to foreclosure because I bought too big a house. And so I would say to you that you've got to create this plan. Use the proverb that's there. I'll try not to turn again because it seems to be making that clicking sound. And do that to help you empower yourself when you're making your budget. Now, the second thing I want you to think about that will help the budgeting process work better is this concept that money is abundant. And a lot of people, there you go. Just leave it. You hear me better? Good. A lot of people think money is scarce, and I can tell you that it's not. Money is abundant. Money flows to the people that create the most value to society. The greater the value, the more people you reach out, the greater the money will flow to you. When most people think about budgeting, they just think about the expense component of budgeting. Their income is fixed, and they've got these expenses that they have to decide between, and it's really no fun. It's a lot of stress. And so if you think about the money and the income side, your income is also something that you can grow and create, and the longer out you think, the more you can create. These two people, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, their businesses didn't exist. Mark Zuckerberg is worth, 20-some billion dollars now, and he's still in his 20s. Elizabeth Holmes started a company. I don't know if any of you all know Elizabeth Holmes, but she's considered to be the next Bill Gates. She's at 19, she started Theranos, which is a company that created, by pricking your finger and drawing blood, she's completely eliminated all of the need for doing blood vials and other blood sort of testing, and it's wiping out a whole industry. And so these 20-something-year-olds have created tremendous value in society, which is where their money is flowing from. Now, you don't have to do that internally. You can do that at your job. You can do that anywhere. You don't have to start your own company. But the more value that you can create in society, the greater the money will flow, and that handles the top part of the income. The third topic I'd like you to remember, which is something that seems pretty basic, but most people don't live this way, and that is to save before you spend. With credit cards, most of us take the time to spend money on the credit card, and what you're doing is you're spending money today, and you're going to pay for it tomorrow. And so you get the order backwards. The credit card comes in, you pay your bill with your earnings, and there's nothing left over. And so the only way to reverse that process is to get rid of the credit card. Now, most of you, I don't know how many of you have credit cards, hopefully more debit cards than credit cards. But what we encourage our clients to do that especially have difficulties with budgeting is to shift to a debit card, use checks, use cash, but don't pay in advance for things that you're going to have to pay back later. And that completely changes the dynamic. And so the spending process, if you save first, what we recommend is saving in 3 buckets. The first is an emergency fund. The second is a investment account, a Vanguard or Fidelity mutual fund, something like that. And then the third is in a retirement account at your job. And so if you think about taking your savings, saving first, putting it into 3 buckets, even if it's $25, it doesn't matter. A small amount, it's a habit. And then spending after that. And so earn, save, spend. We also encourage giving, and that's also before spending. So if you're charitably inclined, and I encourage everybody to be that way, it's earn, save, give, spend. And that's the pattern that we hope to do. Now, the fourth item that I think is very powerful is the concept of needs versus wants. When you budget, everything is a want, right? You want to buy things at the mall. You want to get a nice car. You want to buy a big house. You want to have a lot of things. And back at JMU, when I was here, we took a course and learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Has anybody had that course? Okay, good. It's not Maslow's hierarchy of wants. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And these are the things that one might need to become happy. The first 2 at the bottom are biological and physical needs. Basically food and shelter. Those are the only things on that whole list that cost money. Everything else is free. The need for safety, the need for love, the need for belongingness. All these things are free, and everything else that's not one of those things is a want. And so when you can distinguish between needs and wants, it's very easy to manage your budget. Because you can say, well, do I really need that, or is that just a want? And then you can make decisions. And if you have a long-term plan, you can have that plan drive that decision, and it makes it much easier. Another thing to think about is you will always want more than you earn. There are very, very few people that I've ever met that don't continuously want more and more and more. I have clients that make $3 or $4 million a year, and they still want more. They spend all of it. They don't save anything. How can that be? Well, after you want a house, then it's a jet. It continues to be nicer cars, nicer watches, and it just happens that way for not everybody, but for most people that have challenges in the budgeting area. So Mike Tyson, I don't know how many of you know who Mike Tyson is, but Mike Tyson earned $400 million as a boxer. And 3 years after his boxing career finished, he went bankrupt. His wants far exceeded his needs and his earnings. Another example of that is Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson in his career earned $1.1 billion and went bankrupt. To me, it's amazing that can happen. But when you fill your life up with wants, it's a never-ending cycle. A better mentor for me is the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama wants happiness, and he doesn't find it through physical things. And so the more that you can think through things like that you don't need those things to make yourself happy, you don't need to keep up with the Joneses. These are tools that can help you manage yourself through life and through the budgeting process. So, one thing I want to leave you with when you think about these 4 tools is this idea that how many of you guys go to Starbucks and get coffee? Is that something that people do? I didn't know this because I don't go to Starbucks, but the average spend at Starbucks is about $5.50. And imagine you choose to go to Starbucks and you spend $5.50 a day. And you do that on a month. That's $165 a month. And then you did that over the period of your lifetime up until retirement. You'd spend a whole lot of money, but if you took the same amount of money and you put that into a Roth IRA account or retirement account, you'd have $1.5 million there. Now, how many of you would rather have $1.5 million than have all those cups of coffee? I don't see anybody raising their hand, but I can't see over the light. But I think that would be a much better alternative. And so it's understanding the choices that you make. And our panel today that's coming up after me is going to help you think through those choices. And I think that's really the idea of budgeting, the idea of these 4 items that will help you get there to what you want. And hopefully this will set you on your way to meeting your financial goals over your lifetime. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Michael, for the talk on budgeting. I'm Brad Barnett with the Financial Aid Office, and it's interesting that this talk happened at this time because just the other day, Bankrate.com posted an article about the top 5 money blunders of millennials. Budgeting was number 1. 3 of the other top 5 were not creating a savings plan, delaying when you start retirement, and not understanding credit, which are 3 of the other topics we're going to be talking about tonight. So I always appreciate the budgeting talk. It's basically about putting some muscle behind your money, putting some intention, telling every dollar to do something. And once you do that, you're just going to see it grow, and you're going to see the power happen. You're going to see dreams come true and goals be met. So I want to challenge you to do that and start with the budget and the foundation. If you're looking for some tools and some places to start, there's a boatload of them out there. Excel actually has a really good template that you could use. You could use things like mint.com or Quicken or Microsoft Sunset Plus, or there's a lot of websites out there, youneedabudget.com. So there's plenty of resources out there for you to use if you're looking for a place to get started. So after you get the budget foundation in place, now what we need to do is figure out how are we going to get rid of some of this debt to free up some of that money so you can do these super cool things you want to do with the rest of your life. And to hear a little bit about that process, we're going to have Emily Govil come up and talk to you about getting rid of some debt.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. So my name is Emily, and I have a crazy passion for helping people like you with your finances. I'm no scholar, but I did graduate from the greatest institution in the world just a few years ago. And ever since then, I've been trying to empower our generation to take control of their finances. And today, in this event, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I am so excited to be a part of that change. So today, I'm going to talk to you about how to repay your debt. Michael just talked to you about budgeting, and those 2 things go hand in hand. You can't repay your debt unless you have a really solid budget. How would you ever fit that money in there to repay your debt if you don't include that on a line item in there? You know, if you're spending over your means, if you don't have a good budget, and you're spending beyond what you take in, you're just going to get yourself further into debt. So that's the number 1 thing, and I'm so glad that Michael went first because I think that budgeting is central to everything else that we're going to talk about today. Let's see. So I need to tell you what debt is. Debt is simply borrowed money. Debt is money that you owe someone, right? So you have a lender and you're the borrower, right? And so just like everything in life, there's a cost for borrowing money, and that's called interest. And most of the time you see interest as an interest rate, a percentage, right? You see on your credit card statement or on the TV it says APR, right? How many people know what APR is? Not too many. Annual percentage rate. That's the fee that you're paying to borrow money. And so that's the yearly fee that you pay to have to use someone else's money. Now it can depend on the loan, it can depend on your credit score, but at the end of the day, those are the 2 most important things you need to know, what debt is and what an interest rate is. So now a lot of people talk about what good debt versus bad debt is. Have you ever heard anybody say, oh, a mortgage is a good debt versus credit card debt? If your credit card's maxed out, it's a bad debt. Regardless of how you classify that debt, it's important to know that debt brings a huge risk into your life. And with that risk, you want to try to avoid getting into debt if it's not absolutely necessary. Sometimes debt works in people's favor, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it can set you back financially for years or decades. Unfortunately, our generation, you and I, are facing a whole lot more debt and in higher quantities, particularly with student loans, than any generation before us. So it's really important to understand exactly what debt is. And also with debt, there's a lot of emotions that come with it. So you might be sitting here saying, hey, I took on debt for a long-term goal. I've got it in my budget. I'm good. Some of you might be saying, Emily, get to the point. I'm drowning in debt and I need to start breathing. So tell me something useful. While others of you maybe are still on mom and dad's dime and have never encountered debt before. And so you're here to learn a bit more about it because you know that you might face it in your life and you should want to understand it. So those are, kind of where you could fall on the scale. But what I'll tell you today is that the couple things that I'm going to share with you, the lessons that you'll learn from this, apply to all of you. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I have this friend who called me the other day, and she says, Emily, I need to buy a new car. And I said, okay, did you get a loan? Did you buy it on Craigslist? And she said, no, I have a terrible credit score, and so nobody will give me a car loan. But this one dealership would, and car salesmen as they are very convincing. She said, I can get a 2010 Jeep Cherokee for $20,000, a $20,000 loan, zero down, so nothing up front, at a 15% APR interest rate, and I can pay that back in 5 years, so 60 months. And I said, okay, and she thought, well, that interest rate is less than my credit cards, which are in the 20s, but higher than my student loans, so it must not be too bad. And that's when I introduced her to a loan calculator, an amortization table. If anybody's heard that word before, don't be afraid. I'll explain it to you. It's a little bit scarier than it sounds. So this is what I explained to my friend. So she tells me about this great car loan she's going to get, and I tell her this. At $20,000 over 5 years, so that's 60 months, and you're going to pay 15% APR, $0 down. The first thing you need to do is not be intimidated by this table. Don't look too far into it. I'll explain it all to you. I know numbers can be intimidating. So this is what we did. We took that 15%, and because it's an annual rate, we had to divide it by 12 to get what we're going to pay monthly, right? You still following? Yeah? Okay. So what we're going to do is, today her first payment is due. April Fools. It's not a joke, though. So here's her terms. And here's her beginning balance. So this is, she owes $20,000 starting today, right? Her payment is $475 a month, and she's going to pay $475 a month every month for 60 months until she pays it off. And that's exactly what an amortization chart tells you. It's a systematic way to pay back a loan when you know all those terms up top there. And it tells you how much of your payment, how much of that $475 is going towards the principal, what you owe, versus the interest, what you're paying the institution who took a chance with you and gave you that loan, right? So this is where it gets kind of crazy. That $475 that she's paying today, well, interest is calculated on the remaining balance. So the remaining balance is $20,000. So now we take that monthly interest rate of 1.25% and we multiply it times 20,000. So guess what? Her first loan payment, she had to pay that $475 and $250 out the window, right to the bank. So she really only paid down her balance by $225. Isn't that crazy? So next month, when we go to figure out how much of that $475 is going to interest versus her actual balance, which is what she needs to pay off her car, yeah, sure, it gets a little bit lower, but she's still paying $247 in interest. And so you can tell for the first 6 months, the majority of all those payments are going to interest, right? So now as we go through and get to the bottom of 60 months and she lowers that balance, as you get a lower balance and you multiply that by the 1.25%, then more is going to pay off the principal, and that's how you eventually pay it off. But it's incredibly important to do something like this before you get yourself into debt. So if there's ever a time where you deem going into debt worthy and you really have to do it, this is something that you should go through first. And I'm not that smart. I did this in Excel, and there's a template. So you guys can all go onto Excel, open up the loan calculator template, plug in the terms, just like we have up top, and find this information out yourself. And that's so important to just understand exactly what you're getting into. So after 60 months, that $20,000 car actually cost her $28,000, over $28,000. Isn't that insane? And so that means that a third of the price of her entire car all went to interest. Not to mention that 5 years later, her car is not worth $28,000. All right, so now that you know a little bit about my friend, I'm going to tell you a bit more about her debt situation. So we've got a little chart up here for you. She's got a credit card, a student loan, a Macy's card, and then this car loan, right? So this is the first step to understanding your debts, is to get them organized. I can't tell you how many times I have a friend come to call me crying, I'm drowning in debt. And you say, okay, what are your balances? What are your interest rates? Oh, well, I don't know. You have to know. And that's the first step to having a little bit of that weight lifted off of your shoulders, is by getting organized. So what you would do is create a chart just like this. What are your balances? What are your minimum payments? And what are your interest rates? And from there, we're going to talk about the 2 strategies that you can use to pay down debt. So you can see up here, she's got quite a bit, $43,000. How many of you in the audience think that's a lot of money? How many of you might say, $43,000 is nothing? Try multiplying that by 2 or 3 times, and that's where I am. Right? So wherever you fall, you're going to come into debt at some point in time. And so these strategies that I'm about to tell you will apply no matter if you have $500,000 in debt or $1,000 in debt. So what we've got to do now is create 2 rules to paying down debt before we even can get started. The first one is to stop taking on more debt. Stop using your credit cards entirely. You're only going to put yourself into more debt by having that nice plastic in your pocket. And then the second rule is to go through your budget, and you're going to find not just the minimum total payment of $1,200, but you're going to find more than that. You want to be able to pay over the minimum every time, right? Have you all heard that paying the minimum is no good when you have debt? Yeah? Okay, so you're going to find more money in your budget. You're going to cut out some expenses here and there and increase that number a bit. So let's say that my friend finds an additional $300. All right, so we're going to go with $300. So she's got $1,500 a month in her budget to start paying down her debts. All right, so with that number and our organized chart, now we're going to talk about the 2 strategies. The first strategy is the lowest balance first. With the lowest balance first, you're going to take your nice chart and you're going to order it by the balances, starting with the lowest and ending with the highest. So the Macy's card's got $1,000, car loan has $20,000. So we're going to pay them off in that order. And we're going to dedicate ourselves that until all of our debts are paid off, we're going to put $1,500 towards it, towards debt as a whole. So here's the strategy. You pay the minimum on everything except the lowest balance. So you see the minimum on the lowest balance is $75, but we found that $300 extra in our budget, so we're going to put $375 towards that debt and then pay minimums on everything else. So until that debt is paid off, that's how we're going to do it. Then once that's paid off, we're going to add the $375 to the minimum of the credit card and pay that amount on the credit card and minimums on the others until that's all paid off. You guys following me? Yeah, cool. And then once the credit card's paid off, go to the student loan, and you can see we're still dedicating $1,500 a month towards our debts. And then once the car loan's paid off and you're debt free. So this is a really good strategy for somebody who likes to cross things off their list. They need a little bit more motivation to keep them going. You know, debt's not fun. It's not like it's exciting to pay off your debt in the end, but making those payments every month. If you're somebody who really, needs those small victories, this is a great strategy for you. All right? And then we've got our second strategy, which is the highest interest rate first. So what we do now is with our nice organized chart that we made that alleviated some stress, now we're going to order them with the highest interest rate first. So if you are paying a higher interest rate, you're paying more interest on that loan or on that credit card, right? So the fastest you can pay off your highest interest rate stuff, the less interest you're going to pay over time. So this is a strategy if you're like, I don't care, I don't need that like psychological win thing, I just want to get rid of this now. So this is a strategy you would use. So again, now we ordered them by highest interest rate, credit card, then Macy's, car loan, student loan, right? And now we're going to pay the 150, which is the minimum on the credit card, plus that extra 300 we found in our budget, and so forth, and use the same exact strategy as we did before. So once the credit card is paid off, then the rest of that money goes to Macy's, then the car loan, then the student loan, right? All right, so which method is right for you? One method I did not go over is paying only the minimum, because it's something I wouldn't endorse. So if you paid only the minimum, given that $43,000 in debt that we were talking about, it would take you 46 months to pay that off, and you'd pay over $12,000 in just interest. So that is not an option. If you can't find extra money in your budget, go out to eat one last night a week and put an extra $25 in there. You can. Everybody can. If you have the willpower, you can do it. So the lowest balance first, that one would take 35 months to pay off and would cost you about $8,500 in interest. So that's a good option, right? But the best option is the highest interest first. That's the shortest amount of time and the least amount of interest that you're going to pay. So yes, it does take first place, but again, it's up to you. You need to decide what's best for your personality, because debt is not fun. Debt is overwhelming and can be very upsetting and unmotivating. So you pick between those two strategies what works best for you. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So I've got some closing words for you guys, a little bit of advice. Paying that debt off quickly is the best thing that you can do to achieve financial freedom. Now imagine that $1,500, once you've paid this all off, now you have that to save, to build wealth, to do anything with it. Now imagine having that cash in your pocket after you've been paying it for 35 months. It's pretty awesome. So my first piece of advice to you is live within your budget. If you're going to borrow, don't borrow more than you planned for. A lot of times this happens where you think it's a good debt, but then you can really get stuck in it if you borrow more than what you expected. Get organized. Like I said, just creating that chart and understanding what your debts are is going to help you exponentially in creating a plan to be able to pay off those debts. So then you're going to create a plan. You're going to choose one of those strategies. You're going to make sure that you're sticking to your budget every month and you're dedicated to getting rid of that debt. And then finally, ask for help. Nobody expects you to be a financial genius. When you need help, you got to reach out for it. It's so important that you don't let things fester and you be proactive with your finances so that you can stay ahead of them and not get stuck in a debt ditch. So just some closing words for you. I know a lot of you guys are in undergrad right now, and maybe you haven't been hit with the reality of the real world yet. But I can't tell you how important it is that you're here at this event and becoming financially literate. For those of you who have already graduated, you already know what this reality is like. And life is so much more enjoyable when you don't have debt weighing on your shoulders and financial struggles hitting you from every direction. So my advice to you is to go home, and I challenge you to start creating a plan that you can live by to begin to prepare for your prosperous future. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. It's funny, in a way, whether I'm working with students in the personal finance class I teach at JMU or clients I counsel outside of the university, whether they're 40 years old with kids or 21-year-old in school, and they come to me and they say, hey, I need some help, it usually revolves around this topic of debt. And we have these conversations about what do you really want out of life? And it's like Michael said, no one dreams to file bankruptcy. No one dreams to have their house foreclosed on. But a lot of decisions you make today lead to that in the future. So I want to challenge you as well. You heard Emily's challenge. Think about this. Go back to what Michael had talked about with begin with the end in mind, the great Covey quote from his book. It's a fantastic way to think. So let me throw a little motivational nugget out for you. She gave you a car payment scenario, which is fantastic. Do you know if you had a $450 a month car payment, and the average in this country is around $460 right now, believe it or not, and you're paying on that, you're really limiting your options for the future. If instead you had $450 a month and at your 21-year-old age, you invested that until retirement, and you'll hear Craig talk about retirement in a moment, you could walk into retirement with a little over $4 million. It's that concept of opportunity cost. It's the cup of coffee Michael mentioned versus the 1.5 million. You can play with the numbers any way you want, but as Emily mentioned, debt limits your options, and what we want for you is a life with options. Part of this financial process is understanding your credit. Not that we're telling you to go out and load up on credit cards. You heard the warnings. But it's important that you understand how this stuff works because some of you have it, some of you need to figure out how to manage it, and more importantly, some of you need to figure out how to get rid of it. So we're going to have Kathy Snyder come up and give you a few words on credit.
Thank you all for taking time to come out this evening. It's going to be kind of an interesting change of pace for me to switch gears from primary lecturer to freshman classes to speaking to seniors and or alumni recently graduated. I'm also a JMU alum from the class of 97, MBA. I'm currently working on my PhD in strategic leadership studies, but financial literacy is kind of my home base for where I want to take higher education in terms of helping people understand the credit products that they're enlisting in to complete their college education relative to student loans and some of the other products that you're going to encounter early in your professional and work life so that you understand how to manage them better. I'm not saying that credit is something you can completely avoid for the rest of your life, but we're going to talk about managing it with a little bit more savvy. So let's start with kind of a reiteration. What is credit? Emily talked a lot about this in terms of basically using other people's money for a fee. So we hear a lot of things in society today, buy now, pay later. There's this inherent trust to that relationship that there's also a deferred payment. So we get the excitement of making the purchase up front, but we did it with somebody else's money. So there's this tie-up of future income in these credit relationships and in trust that you're going to repay them. So I want to kind of take my lecturing hat off to some degree and kind of tap into a former life as a loan officer. My first job out of college was a loan officer, and I saw people do credit really well, and I saw people do it really badly. So I don't want to assume that you have models in your life that are doing it well. I want to kind of talk through some of the things that are going to be used to, we tend not to be a real judgy society, or we try not to be want not to be a judgy society, but there are things that when you're looking at credit, you need to look at them through a banker's perspective. And how are they seeing you in your management of your financial relations? So I want to take a look at some of the things that are going to impact the types of products that you're going to buy. The types that are available are generally installment credit. So things like your student loans, mortgage loans eventually, maybe those car loans, things that have a defined point in time where the loan starts, the loan ends. But there's a repayment, you're going to make equal monthly payments in between that start and end point, and then it's going to be done. And then credit cards. Everyone's first temptation to engage in a credit relationship, is the credit card because the application process seems a little bit easier and a little bit more prolific in the offerings. But the revolving credit, the credit card type of products that are out there, there's plenty of choice. The interest rates usually aren't all that great, so you're tying up more of your income to use somebody else's money. But that relationship starts at a defined point in time, and it just kind of rolls forward into perpetuity until one or both parties break that up. So a lot of people have a question of how to get started, and we're going to talk about getting started with the application process. The application process is going to look at what we call the 5 C's of credit. A banker is going to start looking for not just your name and your address information, although that's important because it helps them match your credit file and make sure they're talking to the same person that they think they're talking to, but they're going to look at that credit file. They might even, if you don't have a credit file already established, they might say, well, let's call a previous landlord. Or let's talk to some utility companies. Let's try and assess if this is an honorable person. Do they handle their financial affairs with some level of integrity? Do they pay people back when they say they're going to pay people back? So that's the character piece to this puzzle. The capacity is almost always going to be a conversation around your income. How much do you have? How stable is that job? How long have you been in that job? I will tell you from a banker's perspective, 2 years is kind of a nice starting point to have some perspective in terms of the longevity of your income prospects. So if you can stay in your jobs a little bit longer and make that flow of cash a little bit more continuous, that's going to bode well for you in a credit conversation. Sometimes they'll look at the other debts that you have. So like Emily was profiling, most people don't just have one debt in their mix. They have 3 or they have 4. So you have to look at what that income is really bearing. How many other debts are kind of in the priority ranking before this new debt that you're asking to take on. So that's kind of where the capacity falls into place, although there are days, and I have to tell you a story because when in the lines of people that don't do this well, there was a story floating around when I was a loan officer that this individual had decided to start her weekend, early on a Friday, and decided that being inebriated was an appropriate choice, and that in this inebriation decided that going to the mall was an awesome idea. She gets to the mall, still in an inebriated state, and evidently that inebriation also made her impulsive. And so this individual buys a $600 puppy from the pet store on a payment plan at 24% interest. And so after the weekend passes and all the snuggly new found benefits of having a puppy in the household are kind of wearing thin, she realizes, maybe that wasn't such a great idea. So she investigates some of the local banking options and says, well, the worst rate on an unsecured loan in this area is 18%. So if I refinance my dog, I can save 6%. How many things are wrong with that conversation? Because I can tell you the loan officers in that area, in my bank alone, we kind of had a reaction that kind of resembled the dog, kind of like, So sometimes you wish you could check the mental capacity box or common sense box for some folks. It doesn't always boil down to the income. Her income was fine and she could support the payment. It just wasn't the right decision criteria to start with. But this collateral, speaking of things that you could pledge as an asset for security, the more things that you can add security to your credit relationships, the better the bank feels about loaning you the money. You're less risky. So what can you do? Can you do a collateral scenario as a dog? Maybe not. But this is a really common scenario when you have car loans. So the bank that loans you the money to buy your car takes an ownership interest in the car until the car's paid off. Same deal with your home mortgage. The bank takes an ownership interest until the house is paid off. So you're offering up the asset as a pledge that your promise is good, that you're going to maintain good credit, you're going to make the payments on time, because they fronted you the money to make these particular purchases. The capital issue kind of looks at your balance sheet, and it doesn't really matter if you're doing a revolving credit application or an installment credit application. Part of that application is going to be labeled assets and liabilities. They're going to take stock of what you own versus what you owe. And here's the thing that you want to present to the banker's eyes. You want to present a gap between those two, and you want the gap to be positive in favor of your assets. You don't want to necessarily have those values so close together that it looks like your entire lifestyle is propped up in debt. I've known some individuals who had their own businesses and made in excess of $300,000 a year, and they had $1 of debt for every dollar of assets that they owned. There were people that worked in local manufacturing plants that made $15,000 to $18,000 a year that had more financial freedom. So it's not about how much you bring in at the end of the day, it's how much you tie up. And so the idea is to not tie up so much money with credit products. The conditions generally relate to how's the economy doing? How does that translate into the interest rates that you're going to see? And what kind of interest rate can you negotiate? One of the things that cracks me up, my son was really tuned into commercials. Like, I think if they could translate his homework into commercials, that we would have a much better time getting him to actually do it. But he's very enchanted with the latest Experian commercial. Have you guys seen it, the credit swagger? Lady walks into the office, the guy says, well, let's see what we can do for you. And she puts her feet up on the desk and says, oh, no, I know my FICO score. The question is, what can you do for me? And so he's laughing hysterically at this commercial. He says, Mom, that is so you. Like, no, it's not. I don't put my feet up on people's desks. That's rude. But I like to control the conversation because I like to be able to negotiate the interest rates based on having managed credit products well. So my advice to you is, if you're trying to get started, I would be remiss to tell you that everyone has a great model. I've talked to students in every semester that I've taught, and I can tell you that parents sometimes are the worst money managers. And sometimes their students feel like they are managing their parents or parenting their parents. So starting small might be a smart step for everyone, whether you have a good model or not. I would just caution, if you're going to start with a credit product, probably starting with a credit card is not a great idea. Start with an installment credit that has a defined payoff period. That just makes a lot more sense in terms of building the behaviors and the discipline and putting it in place to get rid of that debt a little bit faster. So tie your first credit experience, if you will, to a need rather than a want. So we have a nice chart with what the needs versus wants are. But let's say that you bought your first car in cash. Maybe you bought something from CarMax, maybe you bought something from Craigslist, but you've invested in the car, maybe it just needs new tires. So it's a legitimate need. Maybe winter's coming, you need new tires to get back and forth to work. That might be something to say, hey, I can pledge my car as collateral. I need to borrow the money to put tires on it. I think pretty much any credit officer would work with you in that particular scenario because you've made the need the focus, and it's a more legitimate reason to give someone a loan. The save more, borrow less. The investment in the vehicle says I've disciplined myself enough to save to pay for that asset in cash, so I don't need to borrow money for that. I'm already invested in this transaction. So anytime that you can add a down payment, it's why banks like to see 20% down payment on a house. It makes it harder for you to walk away from that relationship. It gives you more incentive to treat it correctly and pay it on time. The avoiding credit cards, the bane of my existence in talking to people who are trying to get themselves established. You are going to get pummeled with credit card offers the minute you graduate because you're going to have real income for the first time in your life, and they're literally banking on you not knowing what to do with it. So they're going to put offers in that are, the applications are actually even pre-filled. So all you have to do is sign it, send it back in, and you'll have a credit card in the mail in a matter of days. And depending on what magazine subscriptions you subscribe to, you might even get an increased number of credit applications. Try to say no. My biggest public service announcement, if I could offer one, is anytime you're in a retail setting and someone says, would you like to save 10% today and open a credit account with us? Just say no. It's like the 1980s version of this is your brain on drugs. Just say no. Those store cards are a bad deal every day of the week. They're in excess of 20-some-odd%. It makes no sense. So if you must have one, have one. So pick the store that you frequent the most and kind of limit your behaviors to that. My personal preference, Kohl's, I save the 30%. But here's the trick. You got to pay off. In order to get 30% off discount, you have to use the card. But it doesn't have to stay on that card if it's a higher balance than your regular card. And I generally like to pay stuff off the month that I charge it. So I take personal pride. It's like a badge of honor to pay stuff off and not let the credit card companies make money on me. It was like my whole strategy in college. I never carried a balance. And they always tried to charge me annual fees. I'm like, taking my business elsewhere. So if you have to have a store card, one, but pick one. Don't get scattered. It actually makes you a bigger target for identity thieves to have your financial life fragmented because you can't possibly pay good enough attention to all of those accounts out there that you can actually keep tabs on all of them. You make yourself a bigger target at the end of the day. So in terms of the other credit cards, I would have maybe one regular credit card that has some kind of loyalty perk attached to it that's actually useful to you. I personally like cashback bonuses, but a lot of people that travel prefer cards that have frequent flyer miles. So if that works for you, that's great. Just try not to carry excessive balances. It will eventually hurt your FICO score, which I have profiled here in the pie chart. The amount owed relative to the available balance should never exceed 30%. So you don't want to look like you're living on your credit cards, although an astounding number of Americans do. The average American household has $15,000 in credit card debt. It would take probably roughly 40 years to pay that back if they were just paying the minimums. So we're trying to help you not get into that same debt trap and to make yourself pack a lot of punch when you're trying to control the conversation by way of your FICO score. The other thing to do with your FICO score is to pay on time. If you're trying to do credit repair or you're trying to establish good credit, those two areas carry 65% of your FICO score. And if you're not familiar with what that is a Fair Isaac Corporation way to quantitatively analyze you as a client. So it takes some of that emotion out of the decision-making process. It takes it out of the good old boy network that may have existed 20, 30 years ago in lending. It stops people from profiling to some extent, but it tells a story. And so what I wanted to kind of convey as my parting words for this part of the presentation is to kind of write your own story. It doesn't matter if you have the model or don't have the model. I have students, particularly one that comes to mind from about 2 semesters ago. She came up to me in office hours and she said, Ms. Snyder, my parents need me to, or my mom in this case, my mom needs me or wants me to sign on a loan with her. Mom had credit before. Mom had screwed it up. Mom couldn't get a loan in her own name. So she needed her student, whose credit was new and unspoiled and still reputable, to be on a loan with her. What do you think my response was? Absolutely not. Unless you are completely committed to paying the entire thing back, that is a bad move. Stop the enabling behavior. If you need to make me the bad guy, make me the bad guy. I'm used to it. I used to have to tell people no all the time relative to money. But protect your credit score because it opens doors in terms of getting you homes. It opens doors in terms of buying you vehicles. It opens doors in terms of just creating the kind of freedom that that child's mother will never know. So I encourage you to kind of take this advice and the advice of Emily in terms of debt restructuring and folks in budgeting, just to write your story and write it well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kathy. Credit is one of those things that can be really emotional, and I'm glad Kathy mentioned going home and talking to family or parents that get involved, because in the students I've worked with over the years, and even some of the families I work with outside of JMU, it becomes a very personal kind of thing. Think about where you're from. Think about the relationship of your parents. I've had students who have wallets full of credit cards, and they said that's the only way they know how to live. So, I look at my own situation. Both of my parents were married 3 times. So just think about that for a second. That's like 6 parents. That's crazy, right? I have like a full-blooded brother. I have half-brothers. I have steps. And I'm probably related to half of you in this room, and I don't even know it. I mean, I just travel around, and there's siblings popping up all over the place. I got to see this impact on several different segments of my family life, and it's a very emotional thing. Some bought into credit and ended up filing bankruptcy, and some didn't and just tried to work their way out of life. So let me give you one other, let me monetize it for you and give you a little nugget as well to put this in perspective. Let's pretend for a second that you have $3,000 charged on a credit card, and hopefully none of you do. But if you do, let's just pretend you do, and you never charge another dime. Now, Kathy gave you some interest rates, and you saw Emily had some interest rates on car loans. Let's just pretend it's 19.8%, which is not unreasonable for interest rates I've seen with college students and young adults. And if you just paid $50 a month on that card, and that's all you paid and never charged another dime, do you know it would take you 24 years to pay off that $3,000? And by the time you're done, you would have paid back $14,000, $11,000 in interest. Think about all the things you could have done in life had you been intentional, starting at the budget process with that money and saved and planned and did something productive with it versus spending the next 24 years paying for things that you probably don't even have anymore that you charged 24 years ago. So this is a very important topic to really get a hold of, and hopefully you understand a little bit more about it. Now, where we want to take you with this is to the light at the end of the tunnel. If you do things right now, then you can have a retirement that is just unbelievable. I know it seems far away, but trust me, from someone who's getting older every day, it comes up really fast. So we're going to have Craig come up here, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about some of your retirement options and where you can go from this point.
Has this been great or what? I just kind of wish I would have known all this back when I graduated from high school, was in college. I think it goes back to 1972 to 1978, so I'm an old guy now. But what is amazing is how fast the time will go. I know you've heard it. Your parents probably said it to you, but I'm saying it as well. It's going to go by quickly. So we have to talk about this issue. The money, when you have your first job, there's going to be lots of demands on it because you probably have some debt outstanding. You'll get credit card offers like nobody's business. You'll have to get a car. But I want to talk to you about, there's only 4 ways to wealth. And we're going to talk about retirement not in the sense of, a point in life where I can just relax and not do anything. I don't even like the word retirement because it basically means to be put up on the shelf, to be taken out of circulation. I kind of like the word financial independence. Isn't that a better word, better set of words? Because then you work if you want to, not because you have to, and it's kind of fun to be at that point. I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be. So it's pretty neat. But so this issue of getting started and listening to the discussions about credit and all that and how people spend money on things that are depreciating assets, they wish they wouldn't have done it, and they put it on credit. So let me pass this on to you. You can't build wealth by buying things you don't need with money you don't have to impress people you don't like. So when you've got that first job and you've got something you've never had before, which is a pretty good income, but you've got some demands, I really want to encourage you to start as quickly as possible, because the time will go by, and the earlier you start saving, the better off you'll be. So let's talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about different places you can put it, but now there's only 4 ways to wealth. And if you come up with one other, please let me know. I'll be glad to add it to my talk. You can marry it. Not a good idea. I heard a female friend of mine say to another female friend, a man is not a plan. And I kind of like that. That was pretty good. You can marry it. You can inherit it. Probably not a wise choice. You can hit a windfall, or you can What's the last one? Accumulate it. You can earn it and accumulate it. Now, think about what your first job may earn you. Now, I'm not sure. Heck, my first job earned me $8,000 a year. Whew. All right, so let's say you're going to make $50,000, $40,000. I have no idea. But just pick a number and multiply it by the number of years you'll be working. Surprise, you're all millionaires. You're all multimillionaires. You're just on the installment plan. And it's so important to understand that because when you are first in your career, you have a lot of something and very little of something else. You have a lot of what's called human capital, and human capital is your talents, your abilities, your earning power times the number of years you'll be working. You have a lot of human capital. And what most you have very little of is investment capital. So the whole idea here is as life progresses, human capital number actually goes down because you've got a lot of years behind you, fewer years in front of you. Human capital goes down, and you have to replace it with something, so your investment capital has to go up. So the earlier you start, the better. I was trying to think about this whole issue of compound interest. You know, Albert Einstein said it's the eighth wonder of the world. And we were talking about whether I should be sharing some specific numbers with you, and I decided, as I was thinking about, yes, I can throw out a bunch of numbers, how to get to $1 million, how to get to your first million, your second million, and so forth. I decided, I said, what is a good visual for compounding? And I saw one on the internet. Actually, it went along with Albert Einstein's quote, and I think it might be a good way to think about it. And it's a snowball that you roll up. So you get that little snowball, and you start rolling it, and you roll it and roll it and roll it. It's starting to get a little bit bigger, but it takes a long time. And all of a sudden, it's starting to get heavy, and it's getting big. Now we've actually got something, like the bottom of a snowman. But how long did it take you to get that big? But now that it gets that big, especially you start rolling it down a hill, and it starts gathering on itself, and pretty soon it's as big as a car. So as you're investing, and many of you I know are familiar with the numbers, some of you might not be, and you might want to go find a calculator and just plug in some numbers, and you'll feel this way, and that is when you first start saving, it's like, I'm not getting anywhere. I've been at this for months. My balance is just tiny. I've been at it for years. It's not that big. But what happens is it takes off exponentially a little bit later in life. So the first decade, it might feel like, man, look, I've only got $40,000, $50,000 saved. And then all of a sudden, it's 100, and then it's 200, and then it's $500,000, and it goes exponential on you late in life. But the trick is you've got to get started early. A lot of people, of course, I've done a lot of consulting over the years, and a lot of people who wait too long. There's always excuses. Procrastination's my greatest fault. It causes me such sorrow. I really should stop doing it. Perhaps I'll start tomorrow. So, okay, I got college debt. I got to buy a car. I'm getting married. Got to buy a house. Going to have kids. College cost. How old are you? How old are you now? All of a sudden you're in your 40s and 50s, and I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who, I shouldn't say waited too long, but now it's really, really difficult. So then their financial options are limited, got to work longer. Here's one of the secrets of being able to retire comfortably, and that's to be able to retire early. Get started early enough, it gives you a lot more choice. So let's say you've got your first job. Let's talk about where we can put the money. So you got your first job, pretty good income. Of course, you want to have your emergency fund, you want to have your savings account. Now, money can go in three places. I want to really emphasize this because it's interesting how people misconstrue things. People will ask me, what are your IRAs paying? IRAs don't pay anything. They're a box. You can put stuff into the box, and then I can tell you how it's paying. So you can put money into three different boxes. One is a taxable box. It's a regular investment account or a savings account. You have to get a thing called a 1099. You have to report it on your taxes, just regular stuff. The second box is one we're going to talk about quite a bit, and it's a tax-deferred box. Things like 401ks and 403bs, I'll explain that in a second. And then there's another box over here we're going to call tax-free. So all of the money you invest will either go in a taxable box, a tax-deferred box, or a tax-free box. Now, we haven't talked yet about what types of things you can invest in, but let's just talk about this middle one, because it's kind of the one that's a little bit complex. Now, everybody says things like, what is this 401k? I've read about it, but what is it? Okay, just to clarify things, it's just the Internal Revenue Code. The Internal Revenue Code dealing with saving for retirement is Section 400. So there's 401s, 403s, and 408s. more commonly known as a 401k, that's a subsection. 403bs are tax-sheltered annuities for teachers, and 408s are IRAs. So you're going to have lots of choices, and it's going to be very confusing, but here's some things I would suggest. When it comes to a 401k, if your employer offers a match, don't leave free money on the table. Really frustrates me when I find out that somebody can participate in a 401k and chooses not to and has an employer match. Very typical match is 100% of the first 3 or 4% of pay. So if you put in 4%, your employer puts in 4%. What kind of rate of return is that, by the way? 100%. Who said that? All right, I got a gift for you, because you'll be a millionaire the first. Who said 100% first? Come on down here. Just come on down here. Because I want you to get something, then you can tell everybody what I just gave you. What did I just give you? A $1 million bill. Congratulations. He'll probably be the first one to get there. Now, my only suggestion is hang on to that $1 million bill, and when you get to your first million, pass that on to somebody else and say, how I got there was, I didn't marry it, I didn't inherit it, I accumulated it, and here's how I did it. All right, so it's 100% return, right? You put in 4, the employer puts in 4. Now, I would suggest you go above that if at all possible. If you start early enough, saving 10, 15% of your income, you'll probably be fine in retirement. Most people don't. They wait too long, and that's what gets them behind. So if you went, let's say, 8%, and the employer puts in their 4%, you're already up to 12. It's not all your money, though. Some of it's the employer's money. But I would highly encourage you to at least go to the match. Now, above that, then it gets a little tricky, because then if you're putting in and you're not getting a match, but it's still deductible, but here's an issue, and that is when you have your first job, how much is the deduction worth to you now versus a little bit later when your income goes up? The higher your income, the higher your taxes, the more valuable the deduction. So one thing I encourage all young people to do, all of my kids, when they had their first job, I had them open a Roth IRA instead. Of course, I helped them fund it. Now, there's a regular IRA, individual retirement account, but there's this thing called a Roth IRA. Here's how you get yourself immortalized. Senator Roth of Delaware got this passed, got his name stuck to it. He's now deceased, but he's now immortalized. And all a Roth IRA is, and most all of you will be eligible as long as you have earned income. Even singles, I think you have to be up to about $116,000 before you're ineligible for it. The money you don't get a deduction for, but it grows tax-free, that's over in this bucket, not tax deferred. One of the problems with tax deferral is later in life when you take it out, what do you have to do? Still have to pay taxes. When the one grows tax-free, you take it out and Uncle Sam doesn't get any of it. So while you're young and the deduction doesn't mean that much, I encourage all young people to get a Roth IRA going. All of my kids have one, because there's another reason. You can get to your principal again. So you put $20,000 in, you can get to the $20,000. No restrictions. And you can take $10,000 of earnings out tax-free for the purchase of a primary residence. That also gives you some more options, because in the employer's plan, the 401k, they've got rules as to what you can and can't do. With the Roth, you own it, and you have a lot more flexibility. So we always try to encourage people to have several different types of accounts. Don't have time tonight to even talk about these 3 boxes, what types of stuff you can put in them. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all sorts of things. Maybe that'll be for another evening. But I just encourage you to get started. Financial planners are certainly worth any fee, any reasonable fee that you'd pay them, because they'll help you get on track and stay on track. So I was trying to think of what could I close with that would be very helpful for people in where I was not that many years ago. And gosh, all sorts of things ran through my head. And then I had come across a little booklet. It's very short. A gentleman by the name of George Samuel Clayson had written a series of pamphlets back in the 1920s. It's only 144 pages, so you may want to pick this up. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. And I've updated the language a little bit, but I thought for a really short book, it had a lot of great lessons. And these are the 8 points. They're timeless lessons in financial independence. And here they are. Pay yourself first. Sound familiar? Live within your means. Learn how to invest. Protect yourself from loss. Invest in your home. It may be your biggest expense. Have a retirement plan. Invest in yourself. monitor your goals and your wealth. So enjoy the journey. And again, time is going to go by really fast. I've noticed now that I'm in my 60s that time travels at the speed of your age. So yours is going along at 20 miles an hour, mine's going along at 60 miles an hour. So please be careful not to procrastinate. Have a great time on this journey. Good luck to you all.
Time passes with your age. I actually haven't heard that before, although, yeah, I am kind of running a little faster than my children. A life with options. That's really what we want for you. You know, you've heard about budgeting. You've heard about getting rid of debt and some warnings and understanding credit and the light at the end of the tunnel with retirement. So the decisions you make in your 20s can set you up for an amazing life in the future, or the decisions you make in your 20s can make the rest of your life really hard and really difficult. So I hope you take to heart what you heard tonight, that you create a plan, give yourself a life with options. If you have questions, then feel free to reach out to somebody. As far as at JMU, there are resources available to you there. There's GBiz 160 is a great class to take to get some introduction to a lot of these topics. IS 275 is another class that you may want to take in order to get an introduction and more in depth to some of these topics. So we do have some resources available to you on campus as well. So do your homework, ask your questions, give yourself a life with options. We thank you very much for coming out tonight. This evening will be on the Alumni Office website. The simulcast will be available to be reviewed later, so it's not just a one-time shot, so feel free to tell people to go out and review it at another time. And we appreciate your attendance. Okay, that should be it for the simulcast. Are we done, Chris? I hope so.